April 2nd, 1982. Amidst the cold winds of the South Atlantic Ocean, history suddenly takes a turn. Argentina launches a fierce attack on the Falkland Islands, defeats the British Marine forces stationed there, and captures the Falkland Islands. After this, the whole of Argentina is swept up in celebration. But as soon as this news reaches Britain, the entire country erupts in anger. Despite the 13,000-kilometer distance, the challenges of the sea, and the exhausting journey of several weeks, Britain cannot hold itself back, and soon a massive British task force sets out, cutting through the ocean waves towards the Falklands. It takes them about a month to reach the Falklands, and after that, a fierce war breaks out between Britain and Argentina. The British forces sink the Argentine ship ARA General Belgrano, taking the lives of 323 soldiers. In retaliation, the Argentine forces also sink two British warships, HMS Sheffield and HMS Coventry, as well as a merchant ship, Atlantic Conveyor, sending them to the depths of the sea and taking the lives of many British soldiers. This made the war even more devastating, and before anyone knew it, the conflict dragged on for 74 days. Its impact shook the entire world. The world watched this confrontation with bated breath, waiting to see whose flag would ultimately fly over the Falkland Islands. Let's uncover the full story of the fierce Falklands War that raged on for 74 days. Why does Argentina keep asserting its claim over the Falkland Islands again and again? What was it, after all, that made Britain unwilling to lose these desolate islands, even though they were 13,000 kilometers away, and compelled it to go to war with Argentina? And in the end, who emerged victorious in this bloody conflict?
1982. The iconic images of war at child miles from home.
The British Defence Secretary officially gave Great Britain the explicit right to invade the Falkland Islands. From the Falklands, British forces poised for the final assault to win back the islands following their capture of the settlements of Darwin and Goose Green.
Britain and Argentina have suffered heavy losses. Neither country is particularly anxious to openly stress this particular point, as both proudly speak of the courage, the valor, and the glory.
The Falkland Islands are located in the South Atlantic Ocean, about 480 kilometers off the southeast coast of South America. The Falklands are made up of 776 small islands, with two main islands, East Falkland and West Falkland. It was only long after the development of human civilization that anyone took notice of these islands. But when European countries, in their search for sea routes, reached America and the Atlantic Ocean, they realized its strategic importance. The American subcontinent was rich in natural resources, and European countries began to compete fiercely to take control of it. In this context, the Falkland Islands, located in the South Atlantic Ocean, were considered a perfect strategic stop. Here, naval, air, and eye. By establishing bases, European countries could gain a significant advantage for their ships and routes. In this way, the importance of the Falkland Islands gradually kept increasing. The first to visit the islands was British Captain John Strong in 1690, and he was the one who named them the Falkland Islands. After that, there was no activity here for about 70 years. In 1764, French explorers reached East Falkland and established a settlement there called Port Louis. The following year, the British also reached the Falklands and set up a settlement called Port Egmont on West Falkland. But the Falkland Islands are located about 13,000 kilometers away from Europe. That's why it was quite difficult to maintain the settlements and control over this area. Because of this, France soon lost interest in the island and in 1767 sold its share of the Falklands to Spain. Spain had already established colonies in many large parts of North and South America for hundreds of years. One of these countries was the United Provinces of the River Plate, which is now known as Argentina. After capturing East Falkland, Spain changed the name of Port Louis to Port Soledad and soon took control of the entire Falkland Islands. This included Britain's settlement at Port Egmont. Because of this, in 1770, a situation of war arose between Spain and Britain. However, through negotiations, both sides soon resolved the issue and Spain returned Port Egmont to Britain. However, a few years later, due to economic pressure and other strategic priorities, Britain abandoned Port Egmont. But before leaving, they left their flag and a plaque there in which they mentioned their claim of sovereignty over the island. Spain too could not hold on here for long. Its power in South America was weakening, so in 1811 it vacated East Falkland Island. 5 years later, in 1816, the Falkland Islands, around the same time Argentina, located a few hundred kilometers away, also gained independence from Spain. The entire area of the Falkland Islands was part of the Argentine continental shelf. That's why, immediately after gaining independence, Argentina began to claim sovereignty over the Falkland Islands. Argentina first sent a military ship to the Falklands and then, sometime later, sent a merchant named Luis Vernet to establish a settlement there. After this, in 1828, Argentina declared the Falklands as an administrative unit under its sovereignty and appointed Vernet as its governor. After becoming governor, Vernet stopped American ships from fishing in the Falklands and seized their ships. This made America angry, and in 1831, the US Navy attacked Puerto Soledad in the Falklands, causing significant damage to Argentina. At that time, Britain was rapidly expanding its colonial empire. Seeing Argentina's control over the Falklands weakening in such a situation, in 1833, Britain once again decided to establish its sovereignty over the Falklands. After this, the British also targeted Puerto Soledad. It takes control and drives out the Argentinians who are present there. In place of the local Argentinians, people from Britain and other regions are settled there so that Britain's hold on the area becomes even stronger. After establishing its permanent administrative setup here, Britain makes Stanley, a part of the islands, the capital of the Falklands. But despite this, Argentina did not stop claiming the islands, and this very claim would later become the reason for a major war between the two countries. After World War II, Britain's economic condition had deteriorated significantly. It became difficult for Britain to manage its many colonies at the same time. As a result, many countries in Asia and Africa intensified their struggle for independence and gained freedom from Britain. With the independence of India, Indonesia, and several African countries, Argentina felt that Britain would also withdraw from the Falklands. But Britain did not do so. Britain considered the Falkland Islands as its overseas territory. On the other hand, Argentina considered the Falklands its natural extension, as they were only 480 kilometers from the South American coast and were also regarded as part of the Argentine continental shelf. Therefore, Argentina believed that the Falkland Islands belonged to it and that Britain had forcibly seized them in 1833 and settled its own people there. Because of this, whenever the topic of unification of these islands with Argentina came up, the local people opposed it. Britain used Article 73 of the UN Charter as its main basis for claiming the islands as its own, which stated that the wishes of the inhabitants of colonies should be given the highest priority. But among the people of Argentina, nationalism regarding the Falkland Islands was so intense that they began to call the islands their lost territory, portraying them as a symbol of Britain's colonial mindset. By the 1960s, this dispute had reached the international level. The UN intervened in the matter and, in 1965, passed Resolution 2065, which declared the Falklands a disputed territory and appealed to both Britain and Argentina to engage in peaceful negotiations. After this, efforts to reduce tensions began. In 1971, Britain and Argentina agreed to improve air and sea communications, postal services, and educational and medical facilities in the Falkland Islands. Under this agreement, in 1972, Argentina also developed a temporary airfield in the capital city, Stanley. But whenever Argentina brought up the issue of sovereignty over these islands with Britain, Britain would avoid the discussion by making excuses about first increasing economic activities here. In such a situation, Argentina gradually began to feel that without a military operation, Britain would never return its territory. Meanwhile, there was a major change in Argentina's politics. In 1976, General Jorge Rafael Videla seized power in Argentina through a military coup and established a junta government there. As soon as it came to power, the junta government launched a violent campaign against its opponents, as a result of which thousands of anti-government people They were arrested and killed, and thousands of people disappeared. At the same time, Argentina was also going through a severe economic crisis and civil unrest. Public anger against the government was rising, and in such a situation, the government began to use the Falklands issue as a matter of national pride to distract people. In the media, school curriculum, and public campaigns, the Falklands began to be called Malvinas Argentinas, and Britain was portrayed as a maritime pirate. Since the Argentine people also considered the Falkland Islands to be part of their territory, the public rallied behind the government on the Falklands issue. On the other hand, Britain was also grappling with an economic crisis and had to make significant cuts to its defense budget. These defense cuts also affected the security of the Falklands. Now, the security of the Falklands was dependent on a small detachment of British Royal Marines. For patrolling, there was only one warship present, HMS Endurance, and even that was scheduled to be decommissioned by April 15, 1982. Seeing all this, Argentina began to feel that Britain was no longer capable of maintaining its hold over the Falklands. Because of this mindset, they thought this was the right time to take the islands back under their control. In December 1981, there was a change in Argentina's military regime and General Leopoldo Galtieri became the new junta leader and de facto president. Along with him, Air Brigadier Basilio Lamidoso and Admiral Jorge Anaya came to power. Jorge Anaya was the biggest supporter of a military solution to take control of the Falklands, and he believed that because Britain was 13,000 kilometers away, it would never be able to respond militarily. It was at this point that Argentina began planning to recapture the Falkland Islands. South Georgia Island is located 1,400 kilometers from the Falklands, and at that time, it was part of the Falkland Islands dependencies. Argentina claimed not only the Falklands but also South Georgia, so it was also focused on bringing that under its control. On March 19, 1982, some Argentine scrap metal workers occupied South Georgia and hoisted the Argentine flag there. In response, Britain sent its only warship present in the Falkland Islands, HMS Endurance, towards South Georgia. The withdrawal of the British warship from the Falklands seemed like a great opportunity to Argentina, and on April 2, 1982, it launched a full-fledged attack to seize the Falkland Islands. This is where the Falklands War begins. Argentina named this Operation Rosario, under which about 600 of its soldiers landed in the capital of the Falkland Islands, Stanley, and advanced towards the government house, surrounding it from all sides. A little while later, Argentina's 2nd Marine Infantry Battalion also arrives there with their amphibious vehicles. At that time, there were only 57 Royal Marines and a few local militia present at the British military base. With their support, Governor Rex Hunt initially put up some resistance, but he soon realized that it would be difficult to stop the Argentine forces with such a small military contingent. They surrendered. The Argentine soldiers took control of the government house, took down the British flag, and hoisted the Argentine flag there. By the next day, the Argentine forces had also captured the east coast of South Georgia. As soon as both these pieces of news reached London, British Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher was filled with anger. She announced in the British Parliament that Britain would reclaim the Falklands and South Georgia at any cost. After this official stand by Britain, the UN Security Council passed Resolution 502, demanding that Argentina withdraw immediately. This was a diplomatic victory for Britain, but it had no effect on Argentina, which began to further strengthen its positions in the Falklands. Britain launches Operation Corporate to retake the islands, under which a massive naval task force is assembled, consisting of a total of 127 ships in the British task force. These included 43 Royal Navy warships, 22 Royal Fleet auxiliary vessels, and 62 merchant ships. The Falklands were 13,000 kilometers away from Britain, so all essential supplies, food, fresh water, aviation fuel, spare parts, medical facilities, and ammunition were loaded onto these ships along with the soldiers. Because sending resupplies on time over such a long distance was almost impossible, it was going to take the task force a while to reach the Falkland Islands. That's why Britain decided to first set up a military air base on Ascension Island, located in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean, so that refueling aircraft would become easier. Another reason behind this was that at that time, Britain had only 42 frontline aircraft, whereas Argentina, being closer to the Falklands, could deploy 122 combat aircraft. In addition, British aircraft, especially the Small Sea Harrier, had limited range and endurance. Therefore, Britain had to deploy its carriers very strategically. The Royal Air Force began working quickly, and by mid-April 1982, a temporary airbase became operational on Ascension Island. Soon, Avro Vulcan B Mk2 bombers, Handley Page Victor K Mk2 refueling aircraft, and McDonnell Douglas Phantom FGR Mk2 fighters were deployed here to provide security for the bomber force. Meanwhile, on April 19th, Britain launched Operation Paraque to retake South Georgia from Argentina. At that time, the weather there was extremely bad, with thick fog all around, strong winds, and a snowy environment. During this time, 2 British helicopters crashed, but the British troops regrouped and launched a fierce attack on South Georgia on April 24th. The Argentine soldiers also put up a tough fight. Amidst the intense battle, the next morning an Argentine submarine, ARA Santa Fe, arrived at South Georgia with resupply. But on its way back, it was spotted by soldiers aboard a British helicopter, the Westland Wessex has Mickey 3rd, flying from HMS Antrim, and they attacked it with depth charges. The Navy's HMS British and HMS Brilliant ships also surrounded it and fired several torpedoes at it, causing severe damage. The Argentine submarine was so badly damaged that it could no longer even dive. So its crew abandoned it near the jetty at King Edward Point, the capital of South Georgia, and fled. All 190 Argentine sailors aboard this submarine surrendered to the British forces without any resistance. With this, the British soldiers recaptured South Georgia and once again raised the British flag there. Argentina had now lost South Georgia, but it was determined not to let the Falkland Islands fall back into British hands at any cost. It quickly began sending its reserve forces to the Falkland Islands. 2 full brigades, which included 8 infantry regiments and support units, were deployed to the Falklands. By the beginning of May, the number of Argentine troops there had reached 13,000. During this time, Argentina also appointed Brigadier General Mario Benjamin Menendez as the military governor of the Falklands. Meanwhile, US President Ronald Reagan was trying to prevent the war by engaging in shuttle diplomacy and talking to the leaders of both countries. But neither Britain nor Argentina was willing to back down. Britain's direct demand was that Argentina make an unconditional withdrawal from the islands. At the same time, Argentina began to feel that even though the US was currently pretending to be neutral, ultimately it would side with Britain. Because of this, Argentina cancelled its meeting with the American authorities at the last minute. Just as Argentina had sensed, on April 30th, 1982, the United States publicly announced its support for Britain in this war. Soon, several other NATO countries also came out in support of Britain, and Argentina became increasingly isolated on the international stage. During this time, on May 1st, 1982, the British task force reached the Falkland Islands. After the British task force arrived at the Falkland Islands, Argentina launched its first major strike, which included 36 aircraft such as A-Force, Skyhawks, IAI Daggers, English Electric Canberra, and Mirage 3 escorts. But as these Argentine aircraft reached to attack the British task force, British Sea Harriers intercepted them and soon shot down several Argentine aircraft, including Daggers and Canberra aircraft. After this, an intense air combat broke out between the British Sea Harriers and the Argentine Mirage, the Threed. For quite some time, aircraft from both sides kept firing missiles at each other. Then, an AIM-9L Sidewinder missile launched from a British aircraft hit a Mirage 3 directly, destroying it mid-air. A little while later, another Argentine Mirage, due to a lack of fuel, began to quickly return towards Stanley. But the Argentine defenders stationed there failed to recognize their own Mirage by mistake and shot it down with a missile. While on one hand, the air war between Argentina and Britain continued in the skies over the Falklands. 2. At the same time, the naval war between the two had also reached its peak in the sea. On May 1st, when the Argentine light cruiser ARA General Belgrano was present to the southwest of the Falklands, the British nuclear-powered submarine HMS Conqueror detected it while it was operating outside the Total Exclusion Zone (TSZ) and began to pursue it. On the afternoon of May 2nd, 1982, at around 4 o'clock, the British submarine HMS Conqueror fired 3 Mark 8 torpedoes at the Argentine light cruiser ARA General Belgrano, 2 of which struck the cruiser. The attack caused several holes in the ship and water began to flood in rapidly. Within just an hour, the General Belgrano sank into the unfathomable depths of the South Atlantic Ocean, and the 323 Argentine sailors on board also lost their lives, making up nearly half of Argentina's total casualties in the entire war. Since Britain had targeted the General Belgrano outside the Total Exclusion Zone, Latin American countries strongly criticized this act by Britain. Even within Britain, some people questioned their own government over this, and a few European allies also refused to support Britain in the ongoing war. However, during this time, the United States stood firmly with Britain. Strategically, this incident proved to be extremely significant. After losing the General Belgrano and its crew, Argentina's entire naval fleet returned to its home ports and did not come out for the rest of the war. Throughout the war, only the diesel-powered submarine ARA San Luis went on occasional patrols, but it was not enough to challenge the modern British Navy. However, just 2 days after the sinking of the General Belgrano, Argentina also dealt a major blow to Britain. On May 4th, the Argentine 2nd Naval Airfighter Squadron attacked the British Type 42 destroyer HMS Sheffield. They fired an AM-39 Exocet anti-ship missile, which struck HMS Sheffield right in the middle, causing a massive explosion. The explosion set the ship on fire, killing 20 crew members and seriously injuring 24 others. The British Navy decided that HMS Sheffield would be towed to Ascension Air Base, but the damage was so severe that on May 10th, while HMS Yarmouth was towing her, HMS Sheffield sank east of the Falklands. This was the first time since World War II that a Royal Navy ship had sunk during combat. During this time, Argentine pilots kept relentlessly bombing British warships from their aircraft. On May 21st, the Argentine Air Force heavily bombed HMS Ardent, causing it to sink as well. On May 26th, Argentine aircraft attacked the merchant ship MV Atlantic Conveyor with an Exocet missile, causing Britain to lose 3 Chinook helicopters, 5 Wessex helicopters, their maintenance equipment, runway construction machines, and field tents. This was a major logistical blow for the British. In this attack, the British merchant navy container ship Atlantic they begin to re-establish their control over the Falklands. On the 27th and 28th of May, 2 British para-battalions also attacked Goose Green and Darwin. After a lot of effort, Britain managed to win here, but they had to lose 17 of their soldiers. In this battle, around 50 Argentine soldiers were also killed and 961 of their soldiers were taken prisoner. By the 1st of June, an additional 5,000 soldiers from Britain's 5th Infantry Brigade had reached the Falklands, giving the British divisional commander enough military strength to launch a direct attack on the capital city, Stanley. But a major tragedy was still awaiting Britain. On June 8th, 2 British landing ships, Sir Tristram and Sir Galahad, set out from Port Pleasant for Fitzroy. Senior officials insisted that all the soldiers on these ships be transported directly to Port Fitzroy by sea route so they could avoid the exhausting 11-kilometer march on foot. But as soon as both ships set off, Argentine soldiers stationed at Mount Harriet spotted them, and within moments, 5 Argentine A4 Skyhawks swooped down on the 2 British ships and began heavy bombing. In no time, 48 British soldiers lost their lives and 115 soldiers were seriously injured. 3 Argentine pilots were also killed in this attack. The heart-wrenching images and videos of this incident spread across the world, clearly showing helicopters hovering as bombs rained down on smoke-shrouded ships and soldiers being rescued alive from the burning vessels. This scene became one of the most serious and painful images of the Falklands War, revealing the horrors of the conflict to the world. The war was gradually reaching its final phase, and by the end, the British forces had gained the upper hand. Between June 11th and 13th, British troops launched night assaults on the heights surrounding Stanley, such as Mount Harriet, Two Sisters, Mount Longdon, Wireless Ridge, and Mount Tumbledown, and in all these battles, Britain achieved decisive victories. Throughout the entire war, around 907 people lost their lives, including 649 Argentine soldiers, 255 British soldiers, and 3 Falkland civilians. Finally, after 74 days of intense fighting, on June 14, 1982, Argentine Brigadier General Mario Menendez surrendered to British Major General Jeremy Moore. With this, the British forces completely regained control over the Falkland Islands. Britain's victory in this war was only possible due to the help of several Western countries, including the United States and France. Otherwise, given the kind of resistance Argentina showed over the Falkland Islands, Britain found itself on the verge of defeat several times during those 74 days. After winning the Falklands War, Britain established permanent military bases and modern air defense systems on several of the islands here, which came to be known as Fortress Falklands. The purpose of this was to prevent any future invasions. After this war in Britain, Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher's her popularity rose rapidly, and in the 1983 election, her party achieved a major victory. This victory was especially significant because before the war, she was trailing behind the SDP Liberal Alliance in opinion polls. But after winning the Falklands War, the British people embraced her wholeheartedly. On the other hand, the Argentine government had to endure national humiliation, which soon led to the fall of the military junta, and in 1983, democracy was restored there. However, despite the change in government, Argentina continued to assert its sovereignty claim over the Falklands. But the people living on the Falkland Islands, who were already in support of Britain, saw Britain undertake several development projects to maintain their trust. As a result, when a referendum was held there in 2013, 99.8% of the islanders voted in favor of Britain. But Argentina did not accept this referendum and has repeatedly claimed the Falklands, which it calls the Malvinas Islands, as its own on the international stage. This issue also heated up during the Winter Olympics held in China in 2022. Argentinian President Alberto Fernandez had come to China to attend the event, and during this time, he also met with Chinese President Xi Jinping. After the meeting, China expressed its support for Argentina's sovereignty claim over the Falkland Islands. Britain, just like with the Falkland Islands, had occupied the Chagos Islands of the African country Mauritius for hundreds of years. But recently, on October 3rd, 2024, it had to agree to hand over the Chagos Islands to Mauritius. After this, questions began to arise in international circles about whether Britain would now hand over the Falkland Islands to Argentina as well. On October 7, 2024, Britain's Foreign Secretary David Lammy made it clear that the Falklands are our territory and we will not hand them over to anyone. But Argentina's claim still continues. They say that the Falklands have no historical or cultural relation with Britain. Britain is occupying the islands there by force and coercion alone. Argentina has a geographic connection to the islands and holds legitimate authority over them. This is why the Falklands have become a national symbol in Argentina. People get tattoos of its map and have its map printed on lockets and t-shirts. They believe that even though NATO, the US and the world's major powers are with Britain, and even though Britain has modern artillery and nuclear weapons, Argentina has the rightful claim to the Falkland Islands, and they are confident that one day this right will surely prevail. In this way, the Falklands have become a symbol of national identity, pride and global geopolitics, and perhaps that's why its resolution is not so easy.